Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Valsa. Today we'll be talking about the Rise of the Dragon KVK and my overall impressions. Alright, my alliance just finished its KVK a couple days ago. Right now we're chilling in Home Kingdom, farming some mana, and getting ready to register for the next KVK. So let's talk about Rise of the Dragon, and this review is going to be an overall impression of the KVK, the map, and the matchmaking system. Alright, so let's get right to it. What did I think of the season? Unfortunately, the season gets a big old thumbs down for me. And why is that? Well, let me tell you something I learned about game design many years ago. And literally one of the worst design decisions you can possibly make is to follow this pattern. 1. Have a substantial problem in your game. 2. Fix that problem. But then 3. Unfix and reintroduce the problem into your game. And unfortunately, designers did exactly this with Rise of the Dragons. And specifically, what am I talking about? Well, this is my 10th Call of Dragons season, and you could probably throw out season 1 because no one knew what the heck we were doing. But for every other season, by far the single biggest factor in determining whether the game was fun or not was this. Did the season have significant, meaningful, competitive fighting? Okay, what does that mean? Well, significant is basically fighting throughout the season. Alright, a few days of peace in Zone 1 when the season opens, that's fine, right? But you want fighting in Zone 2, Zone 3, and Zone 4. No farming zones like outside your starting zone. Meaningful means fighting for real stakes against opposing alliances, right? Fighting for territory and key objectives, which is mostly behemoths in Call of Dragons. Right? The statues don't satisfy it. They can be fun, but they're not really that meaningful. Battle Abyss doesn't satisfy this. Friendly skirmishes you arrange with your alliance don't satisfy this. You need real fighting against your opponents. Competitive, basically no Diplo wins. The point of this game for me, and I think the vast majority of players, is to have fun competitive wars where the outcome is in doubt. Look, I've been in seasons where the outcome was decided before the season even kicked off, frankly on both sides of that equation, and those seasons were always awful, whether I was on the Diplo win side or the Diplo loss side. Alright, anyway, in my prior seasons, it was hit or miss where we had significant, meaningful, competitive fighting. Some seasons we did, some seasons we didn't. And the seasons that didn't have this, frankly, were awful and made me question whether I wanted to keep playing the game. But then we had seasons that did have it, and it was awesome fighting, one of the best fights experiences ever had in a game like this. And I think the devs realized this was a problem and developed a situation to fix it. Now look, nothing is 100%. As soon as you think you've made something idiot-proof, God's going to come along and invent an even better idiot, right? But the Dragonfall system got as close as you could to solving these problems in the game. All right, let's recap Dragonfall, right? In the Dragonfall system, your alliance registered for that KVK, assuming it wanted to, and it was assigned a kingdom rating A, B, C, or D. All right, there was also Paragon kingdoms, but we'll put those aside for the moment. All right, your kingdom then found 3 other kingdoms that you wanted to play with this, and you formed a team of 4 kingdoms, right? And if you were in the smaller KVKs, it'd be more than 4, but let's just stick with 4 for now, right? For example, in the AB bracket, it was a team of 2 A's and 2 B's. Your team of 4 then got matched with a similar team of 4. Each team got divided into 2 camps. We'll say blue 1 and blue 2, red 1 and red 2. The camps got placed in opposite corners of the maps into their starting zones. Everyone had access to a zone 2, and in which each side would send 1 camp. For example, blue 1 would fight red 1 and blue 2 would fight red 2. In zone 3, like a similar deal but with a foes flip. So right this time blue 1 would fight red 2, etc. Everyone had access to zone 4. Alright, was it perfect? Like I said, there's no such thing as perfect, and there are definitely things I would tweak in this system. I didn't like the permanent build destruct buff we had in the Dragon Zone. I thought there should have been some way after the dragon was taken to secure the Dragon Zone completely. But this was, I think, by far the best system Call of Dragons had ever set up. Right, you form 2 teams of roughly equal strength. Everyone on each team has decided to play with each other before you even know who their opponent is. Right, Diplo wins are eliminated essentially. Right, you have fighting in Zone 2, fighting in Zone 3, fighting in Zone 4. Everyone has access to the zones, and there's no way to disrupt that before the zones open. Significant fighting, meaningful fighting, and the fighting is competitive. Now, like I said, nothing's 100%. I'm sure some of you were part of a KVK during Dragonfall where something happened and it wasn't all that you could have hoped for. But look, all you can do is all you can do. And the system the devs designed went a long, long way to fixing a substantial systemic problem Call of Dragons had. Okay, and then what do? They scrap it immediately. For larger servers, Rise of the Dragons was a 6-kingdom KVK. Everyone went in blind. No one knew who they were going to be against or who they would partner with. At reset one day, you saw what KVK you were in, you saw who their kingdoms could be, and you know what happens when that happens? Now you've introduced the possibility of Diplo wins. All right, now I want to be clear, my KVK was not a Diplo win, but I know that there were some that happened in other KVKs, and that's very unfortunate. Now on this map, every Zone 2, 2 kingdoms have access to every Zone 2. And now what does that mean for meaningful fighting? It's a roll of the dice, right? My kingdom ended up sandwiched between 2 of our allies, so we did not have any meaningful fighting in Zone 2. Now, we did arrange a skirmish with one of our allies, which is better than nothing, I guess, but just barely, right? It's one small step above merit trading. You have to do some sort of fighting so you can buy out the elixir store, etc., but it's not the fun you want to have, all right? Now, Zone 3 is even worse, right? Zone 3 is a dang peace zone to open, right? Everyone has their own private Zone 3, which at the open only they have access to, right? You go in, you take the behemoths, you build it how you want, and then, I don't know, a week or so later, another gate opens up, and you can invade other Zone 3s, all right? Now, I've seen this system done a bunch of times, and I would say 19 out of 20 times, when you have the peace zone that transitions into you can invade it zone, there's no meaningful fighting that happens, right? It can happen, but it's very rare. The Zone 3s were terrible. All right, and then we get to Zone 4. Interesting map design, generally okay. I don't know why you would make the dragon accessible only from one side of the map, but whatever. All right. So how did my KVK go? Well, like I said, it was not a Diplo win. We had good competitive fighting in Zone 4, but we had no meaningful fights before then. So we failed the significant test with farming zones in Zone 2 and Zone 3. Look, I know some KVKs went well, but I also know a bunch of KVKs headed way worse than us even. All right. So now when I've discussed this previously, I've gotten pushback in a couple of ways. So let me, Mr. Gorbachev, let me please tear down those straw men. All right. The first thing people say is like, hey, it's up to the High King, High Queens, the kingdom leadership to make sure you have competitive KVKs. God, I hate this argument, right? For a number of reasons. First, of course, the kingdom leadership should do what they can to arrange for fun, competitive KVKs. But that relies on cooperation from other leadership to make balanced KVKs, right? Like I have 100% been in KVKs before I even know who the other kingdoms were, that like 4 of the 6 kingdoms had already decided to make an alliance and a Diplo win, right? They got 75% of the power, they got 2/3 of the kingdoms, and they're always like, hey, we're aligned with each other and we don't care. So yeah, your king has an obligation, your queen has an obligation to try and make a balanced KVK, but it's beyond their control, right? The second reason I hate this argument, it ignores like 95% of the player base that has no say whatsoever in the diplomacy of a KVK. And sure, some like the High King or your Diplo team, you know, they might be able to arrange a good KVK some of the time, and maybe it's their fault if they don't, or maybe it's some of their fault if they don't. But what about all the other players who had absolutely no input whatsoever in the diplomacy? It's just like, go tell them to migrate, right? That's terrible. And the third thing is it requires the player base to try and mitigate a game design problem, right? If you leave your cupboard open and your dog eats all your potato chips, is that your dog's fault or is that principally your fault? Right? This is a game design issue, and blaming the player base is a silly burden shift. The player can and should mitigate this problem, but it's the developers who really bear the burden. And you know why that is? Because yeah, maybe the High King or High Queen can do something about it some of the time, but most of the players, how do they solve this problem? They solve this problem by quitting Call of Dragons and playing a different game, right? And the worst thing is the developers did solve this problem, but then they decided to abandon their solution for whatever reason. All right. The other argument I hear is that the High King Queen chooses the scenario, and they could have just chosen not to play Rise of Dragon. They could have chosen to play Dragonfall again. Unfortunately, this is just not true. Games like this, everyone wants to play the new hotness. There's simply not enough of a player base to introduce a bunch of new things that no one has ever seen before and expect a meaningful number of kingdoms to not play the new stuff but to go play the old stuff. All right. How many KVKs did we get for Rise of the Dragon? I think there was something like 37 the last time I checked. Yeah, 37. How many Dragonfall KVKs? Well, let's check it out. Oh, look, literally 0. Okay. Even if you signed up for Dragonfall, you spent the season in Home Kingdom farming. All right, now at the time of this recording, we've got like sort of the preview for the next season. It looks like we have a choice between Calling of Courage and Winter is Upon Us, which is interesting to me, mostly because they have not given us the choice to go play Rise of the Dragon again, and that seems strange to me. Now, this is the day before registration opens, and I'm 100% prepared to believe that when registration opens, this will change and Rise of the Dragon will be an option. But assuming this is the case, Calling of Courage, I think that's the season where you got to like switch out a limited number of hero skills. That was interesting. Winter is Upon Us. I think that was the first army group season. I also think Long Range Warfare was a part of that season, so that's interesting as well. Assuming this is the case, it's unclear to me because these are two kind of retread seasons, and I don't know, like there's not an obvious one you would choose. And so this might be the first one where we see a number of kingdoms, like split evenly, or at least enough kingdoms that you could have both seasons going at the same time. I guess we'll find out. Anyway, that's my opinion of Rise of the Dragon. I'll break down the individual mechanics later on, but those things are always less important to me than the fighting and the fun of the season. Overall, this was a disappointing season to me, exacerbated by the fact that we just came off the high of Dragonfall, and then we crashed down to the Rise of the Dragon, which I think was a big step down for Call of Dragons. Hey, that's it, and thank you to everyone for stopping by. If you enjoyed this content or found it helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button. Remember, you can send me your war pets if you'd like me to take a look or review them, and I will be featuring the strongest war pets in the game right here on this channel. Look for more details in the description below, and until next time, stay classy, Belleron.